Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. 7A, I'm Mr. Hescox. We've been working through genetics, why they're important to genetics, and how things work through genetics. Your warm-up question refers directly to yesterday's lesson. It says, what type of sex chromosomes do you have, and how do you know? If you are a girl, you would have XX because mom gives you an X, dad gives you an X. If you are a boy, you would have an X and a Y. Mom gives you an X, dad gives you a Y. Today we're going to talk about sex-linked traits. Now these are traits that are specifically carried on the sex chromosomes. Let's get started. So a sex-linked trait are carried by genes that are located on the X and Y chromosomes. Sometimes, because you don't have matched chromosomes in the man, you can come up with these sex-linked disorders. The X chromosome in women is matched, so if you have to have two bad copies. But with a man, you only have one X chromosome. If there's a bad gene on this X chromosome, you can have this disorder. To have a sex-linked trait, you must have a bad gene on the X chromosome because we have two copies of most genes. If one is faulty, the other copy will take over. So if you have a bad gene for something, the good gene usually carries over. But sometimes we end up with diseases, and that's usually caused by two bad genes. But in men, you only have one chromosome for X. If there's a bad gene on an X chromosome, you will have whatever bad gene there is. So here's a perfect example. This is a color blindness test. I've seen this many a times. Here, if you can see in the middle here, this is a green 2. Here's a brown 2. This is yellow and brown. This one's a little harder. The 2's right there. This is red and blue. But if you can't see the number 2 there, that's color blindness. Speaking of color blindness, I coach football. So a very talented running back many years ago actually was getting in trouble all the time for dropping the ball at night, like he was catching punts. And he kept dropping it and dropping it. And I was like, you're too good for this. And I went up and talked to him on the sidelines. And I said to him, I'm like, what is going on? He's like, Mr. Hescox. He's like, remember in our class when we talked about color blindness? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm colorblind. Well, he was colorblind, so he could not see the brown ball versus the black sky at night, and it was very difficult for him. Needless to say, I went out and maybe informed some other coaches so that they would let him have something different to do. Here are some types of other sex-linked traits from your book. So we have hemophilia. Hemophilia is a bleeding disorder. I've only ever had one student who had hemophilia, but you have proteins in your blood that cause it to clot. When you're missing those proteins, if you would get cut, you could literally bleed for hours and hours, and sometimes you could bleed to death. We talked a little bit about color blindness. Baldness is the next one. If you are baldness, it is generally carried on the X chromosome from. So if you want to know, are you going to be bald? I would look at your grandfather on your mom's side, and that should give you an idea of who's bald and who's not. Well, the reason that these traits most frequently affect men is because you only need one bad gene to do this. Now, women can get this gene, but they have to have two bad X chromosomes. I have had one girl who was colorblind. She had two. Her mother was a carrier and her father was colorblind. So she got the bad gene from her mom and the bad gene from her dad. So, like, she had X for color, and her mom was a carrier, so she had a little c. Dad was colorblind. She got the X with the little c and the other X with the little c, which equals a colorblind woman. Mom was a carrier. Dad was colorblind. The Queen of England. This is Queen Victoria's family of the early 1900s. And I'm going to show you a pedigree. The royal family had a major problem with hemophilia because they didn't allow a whole lot of new blood into it. And the hemophilia rate in the royal family became very, very high. So in this pedigree, oops, here we have Queen Victoria and Prince Edward. Queen Victoria, or Albert, was a carrier for hemophilia. She had every one of these lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 children. 2 of the girls were carriers. Prince Leopold was actually hemophiliac. Of her grandchildren, 1, 2, 3, 4 carriers. 3 of the boys were hemophiliacs. When you get to her great grandchildren, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hemophiliac boys. 1 baby died before they could determine it, so it becomes more and more prevalent in this. What's really interesting here, you can see here's Queen Elizabeth. She's the queen right now. Prince Charles is set to become king, and there's his children. You see them down here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that takes us to the end of sex-linked traits, which are traits that are carried on the X chromosomes, and sex disorders. Sex traits disorders such as hemophilia, baldness, color blindness. Muscular dystrophy can be on there too. But make sure you get your work done, and I'll catch you later. I'm Mr. Hescox. Thank you.